So today we are going to be talking about a specific type of comma error known as a comma splice. And before we get into what a comma splice looks like, we're just going to review a couple terms here to make sure that we are able to identify the parts of a sentence that might tell us where a comma splice would be. So just as a review, an independent clause is a clause, a group of words in a sentence that on their own could be a complete sentence. A dependent clause would be an incomplete sentence. It would depend on another independent clause being in the sentence, able to hold it up and make sure it's grammatically correct. We'll go over those in just a moment. Then we have our fanboys, which I'm going to bring out here. So you've probably heard of our fanboys, which are called coordinating conjunctions. And these are made up of for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These help us connect independent and dependent clauses, and we're going to learn when to do so with or without a comma. So let's practice identifying independent and dependent clauses. So there are two clauses in this sentence right here. Because my parents arrived earlier than expected, that's our first clause. I made breakfast for them. That's our second clause. Looking at this first one, we can tell it's a dependent clause. Because my parents arrived earlier than expected. We can tell that we just need more information here. It really has to do with this word right here, because my parents arrived earlier than expected. Just listening to the inflection and the sound that that sentence makes, we know that we need another independent clause right here. I made breakfast for them. That could be a full sentence on its own. So today, with comma splices, we're going to be looking at independent clauses only, but it's important that we can identify them as independent clauses before we try to fix a comma splice. So let's look here. Now we have two independent clauses. My parents arrived earlier than expected. Independent clause. I made breakfast for them. Independent clause. So a comma splice is what happens when you join two independent clauses incorrectly. So before we talk about the error, let's talk about how we should join these two in the right way. So our rule here is to join two independent clauses you must use a comma and a conjunction. And it's really important that we have both of those in there. So a comma and we'll put in the full name, a coordinating conjunction. So we have our two independent clauses here and here. So to connect them, we're going to change that period to a comma. And then we'll put in one of our conjunctions. Remember, if we look up here, these are the conjunctions we have to choose from. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. My parents arrived earlier than expected. I think the one that makes the most sense here would be so. So I made breakfast for them. So this is a grammatically correct sentence, two independent clauses connected with a comma and one of our fanboys. Before we go any further, one thing I want to say is that remember that in our coordinating conjunctions list, our fanboys, that B stands for but. It is not because. Because is not one of the fanboys, which is a common mistake. So now let's talk about comma splices. A comma splice is when two independent clauses are joined incorrectly because they only have a comma. So let's just double check that these are independent clauses. Tickets to the baseball game were already sold out. That could be a full sentence on its own, so that's an independent clause. We decided to go to the movies instead. That could be a full sentence on its own, so that is an independent clause. It's joined with only a comma here, and commas can do a lot of things, but they are not strong enough to connect two full sentences together. So one way we could fix this is by adding in one of our coordinating conjunctions, or fanboys. Tickets to the baseball game were already sold out, so we decided to go to the movie instead. And then our comma splice has been fixed, and it's now a grammatically correct compound sentence. Let's go ahead and look at the next one. Her black lab was panting incessantly. He definitely needed a bowl of water. So again, let's check and make sure that these are full sentences on their own. Her black lab was panting incessantly. Yep, full sentence, independent clause. He definitely needed a bowl of water. Yep, full sentence, independent clause. And we know that this is an incorrect sentence because we can't just have a comma join two full sentences together. So there are really two ways we could fix this. We could do what we did with this sentence up here and add in a conjunction. So her black lab was panting incessantly, and he definitely needed a bowl of water. That would make it grammatically correct. But what we could also do is we could keep them as two separate sentences. The goal is not necessarily always to join them. We want our sentences to sound the best. So looking at it one more time, her black lab was panting incessantly. He definitely needed a bowl of water. Maybe we would just make that into a period. We already know that these are two independent clauses, which means that they can stand on their own. So we could turn that into two different sentences. Now let's look at the final one. There's a lot more going on here. We actually have three clauses. So let's go ahead and identify them as independent or dependent clauses. I wanted to cook crepes. That could be a full sentence on its own. So that's an independent clause. We're not going to include our conjunction in here. I didn't have enough eggs. That is an independent clause. I ended up just making pancakes instead. That is an independent clause. So you can have as many independent clauses linked together in a sentence as long as they're linked together correctly. So let's check how they're connected. I wanted to cook crepes, comma, but I didn't have enough eggs. So, judging by our rule, which is to join two independent clauses, we need a comma and conjunction. This connection is good. I didn't have enough eggs, comma, I ended up just making pancakes instead. Remember, our comma is not strong enough to connect two independent clauses all by itself. So, we could put in a conjunction, as we've done before. I wanted to cook crepes, but I didn't have enough eggs, so I ended up just making pancakes instead. That sounds fine. Or, as we did above, we could get rid of that conjunction, go ahead and turn that comma to a period. Our I is already capitalized, so that would be grammatically correct as well.